Here's one. Look at the size of it. Massive. There's more of them. 5, 6. See if I can lift one above my head. These giant gritstone wheels are millstones, and they weigh around 2 tons each. Nobody knows exactly how many of these there are, but it's estimated that there's around 1,500 of these abandoned around the landscape of the Peak District. In today's video, we'll take a look at how these giant millstones were carved from rock faces like this. We'll take a look at how they were used, and more importantly, why so many of them have been abandoned here in the Peak District. Our first destination of the day is Stanage Edge, this huge escarpment stretching for around 3.5 miles across the Peak District. This amazing rock face was formed over millions of years and is made from gritstone. This is a super hard rock that almost all of the abandoned giant stone wheels that we're going to see today are made from. This place is incredible. It's hard to believe that millions of years ago all of this was underwater. And this is the result of what they call a river delta. So where a river met an ocean, all the sediment went to one side. And when it was washed away, you're left with this fantastic escarpment, or ridge, whatever you want to call it. Nowadays, this is a hugely popular spot for hikers and climbers, but just a few hundred years ago, this was an industrial hotspot. Millstone rock was in huge demand. Hey you guys! This is the second location of the day. It looks like a forest from a fairy tale. Although I'm expecting a very different view when we get through this woodland. I had to take a layer off. Harder work than I thought. What an incredible view this is. So this is Millstone Edge. I'll let you guess how it got its name. I was supposed to end up at the base of the quarry, but I've missed a turn off somewhere in all the long bracken, so I've ended up coming round. There's quite a few of these disused quarries across the Peak District. You can see Stanage right in the distance. I better try and find some lower ground. Just a few hundred yards walk from the Millstone Edge, and this is the old Lawrenfield quarry. I'll show you on the way out, but just walking in here, there's old millstones scattered everywhere. So I'm not sure why this millstone has got this big metal thing in the top of it. So these millstones were mainly made for grinding grain or corn to make flour for bread and things like that. But some of them were used for things like grinding tools in nearby Sheffield, or crushing pigments for producing dyes in fabrics and things like that. I don't know how they did it, but these were somehow transported to windmills and water mills all over the UK and other parts of Europe. There is evidence to show that they've been manufacturing millstones in the region since around the 13th century, but things ramped up from the 16th to the 18th century anyway. Hope you're enjoying the video so far. I just want to give a quick shout out to Squarespace, who's kindly sponsored the video today. So Squarespace is the all-in-one web design platform where you can get your own domain name or create a website from scratch all by yourself. You don't need any prior knowledge of web design or coding. All we did was simply choose one of their ready-made templates. We uploaded our own photos, added some text, and within a couple of hours we had a website. So there's loads of different things you can use your website for. Jo uses the e-commerce feature so she can sell her artwork and paintings. I've used mine to promote my YouTube channel, as well as send out newsletters. You can upload video, set up a subscription service. Pretty much anything you can do on a website you can do with Squarespace. So if you fancy having a go at building a website of your own, then click the link in the description below or head over to squarespace.com/Paul Messner. You'll get a totally free trial, and when you're ready to go live, you'll get 10% off your first purchase. The majority of the millstones were all cut from the rock face and carved by hand right at the quarry. The quarrymen would drill holes into the rock face, put wooden wedges in there and just hammer them. Big hammers and picks. Looks like they even had time for a bit of artwork as well. And then from big chunks of gritstone, They'd use a process called ringing or drilling and wedging, where they would, using picks, they would shape channels and just chip away at the rock face until you've got a circular base to start from, and then finish everything with a procedure called dressing, just to make it all neat and tidy and ready for going to the mills. They're all trying to hide amongst the bracken, look, loads of them. So nobody really knows how many of these millstones are scattered around the landscape, but it's estimated that there are at least 1,500 of them. Some of them in plain sight, like this one. Some of them are buried beneath all of the undergrowth, never to be discovered again. But they are a massive and heavy reminder of our industrial past. Pretty much all millstones were made in pairs. So there would be the bedstone, which once at the mill remained stationary, and then the runner stone, which actually spun on top, and that created a friction for the grinding. The grain that needed to be milled would go through this hole in the top, hit the bedstone below, along the furrows as the wheel was turning, and then it would come out as ground flour. Like anything, millstones needed regular maintenance, so they would often have to be redressed at the mill, where they would re-hand carve all of these little furrows just for the grain to be able to pass through. Imagine the amount of time it took to make, and the upkeep of these as well. Really hard work using primitive tools. Highly skilled craftsmen needed to do that. So the ones you see here are quite small. Some millstones were up to 5 feet in diameter and weighing nearly 3 tons. So transporting these was a really difficult task. So we're at the quarry now, and as you can see here, this was like a road that they would have built just for rolling them down. So these would have been on their end. They'd be using pulleys, rollers, anything they could to try, and a lot of manual handling to try and shift these things. There were no HGVs back then either. They would have gone onto the back of some sort of wagon pulled by horses, I'm assuming. So these tracks or roads were known as boom roads or millstone tracks. They actually seem in better nick than most of the roads we use in Sheffield at the moment. We've just been for a wander down there to the Bowl Hill quarry, trying to find the Millstone graveyard, but we couldn't get down, could we? I haven't got its location, but we just got to the top and it was just sheer drops all the way down. There's so many different paths, and you wouldn't think that this was once a bustling industrial area. So the late 19th, early 20th century saw a big decline in the traditional types of milling anyway. So there was no need for these huge millstones anymore. There was the introduction of white flour and white bread, which needed finer sorts of rollers, which were either steel or iron rollers. They'll have been much easier to produce than these big lumps, and definitely easier to transport. But the quarrymen had already cut these from the rock and already shaped them, and so they're just standing about waiting, surplus to requirements. But they're so difficult to move. So that's just why they got left there. Like I said, each one of these weighs around 2 tons, something like that. Lots of the millstones were unfinished. Some of the mills just didn't even bother collecting them. It wasn't worth the effort for them. And over the years, they've just been absorbed and blended into the environment. They become homes to small animals and mosses and things like that as well. These old millstones have now become part of the culture and heritage of the Peak District. In fact, a millstone is even part of the National Park's logo now. People travel from all over the world just to take photos of them. So as you might know, I'm a really big advocate for leave no trace. And this is a really big example of where industry has left a huge trace of its existence on the landscape. And you would think of that as being a tragedy or a natural disaster, but these have become part of the land again. They are the natural rock and gritstone from the environment. They're just formed differently now. If you blink, you could miss them because they just blend in now. We've got to find our way back to the car now through all this maze of quarries. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.